Jeez.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are live. This is episode number 168 with Lloyd De Jongh. We're going to get into who actually controls America and where the money is coming from. Everybody is constantly discussing or saying to follow the money. And Lloyd took the time to actually dig up the money trail and to actually follow it. And it's much different than most people presume. So we're going to be going into that today. Last week, I took the week off. I took a vacation with my son up to Tahoe. On the way home, I picked up a new Trump hat just to upset the liberals, but it's fitting for today's show. Anyway, Lloyd, welcome back to the show. What is this, number 10 with you, or have we done 12? Or no, we did 10 on Islam and 4 on Judaism, I think, right?
7 plus 4 plus 2. That's 13, right? 7 plus 4 is what? 11?
Yeah. Plus,
Plus
okay,
2
so
is
13. Okay, yeah, you're right.
plus
So,
2 is 14.
yeah, so I wasn't counting these shows on Judaism that we've done, but
Yeah, and Islam
anyway.
is well, yeah. Well.
Yeah, somebody's saying it seems a little early. Yes, we're going live early today. Lloyd has been getting up at 2 a.m. to do the shows from Warsaw, Poland. So today we're trying to do the show a little bit earlier to give Lloyd a break so we can actually get to bed at a normal time. So hopefully everybody can appreciate that. And anyway, so we have a lot to go over. Lloyd has put together a PowerPoint presentation. We'll be showing lots of citations and whatnot on screen. We're going to be showing how Ryan Dawson, Adam Green, Jesse Spotswood Moorfield, Brendan O'Connell, etc., how they're full of crap, how they just keep pounding this one narrative because it's the accepted narrative and they don't actually fact check what they're discussing. They're full of crap. So this is going to be a tour into the actual financial records of the lobbying groups, APAC, etc., who funds what, how much, all of that good stuff. So anyway, Lloyd, take it away.
All right. So yeah, in various discussions on YouTube and social media, we were told to follow the money. We were told the Jews have unlimited money. Israel has unlimited money. And one fact that got pounded home, and the idiots who kept saying this will know who they are. They're the ones who said, the Muslims have no money. The Muslims have no power. The Muslims have no influence. So I decided to look into that and see how true that was. Um, let's just say the findings are it's not true.
Well,
So it's
what they want us to believe typically is that Muslims are just brown people with box cutters who live in caves, and they're extremely stupid, and then that's the extent of it. They couldn't possibly be a threat, and you know
yeah,
the only thing you should talk about is the Jews 24/7 and nothing but the Jews.
right. So yeah, what I've done is I prepared quite a detailed presentation on this. The link has been made available. It's in the comments. It's in the description. You can download it. You can look at it. Um, yeah, and you can see the facts for yourselves. You can show it to others, and it refutes everything that all of these pro-Islamic pundits have been saying online. And what's interesting is that the comments coming from people like Arab Green and Riyad Dawson are very much in line with the Arab Islamic lobby. People talk about the Jewish Israeli lobby, but people don't realize there's actually a very, very powerful, very wealthy Arab Islamic lobby. And the comments coming from, as I said, our pro Islamic friends online are very much in line with that lobby, which I'll leave that open. I'll just leave that hanging. So, yeah, anything you want to mention before we start? Yeah, otherwise, I'll just begin. I'll bring up the presentation and we can begin.
Well, I mean, handsome lies and all of these people repeat the same exact talking points, and it's a laundry list of points. And we started realizing, 6 or 8 months ago, that these talking points were exactly in line with Nazism and with Islam. And so it became blatantly obvious, and the more we've delved into this area, the more we've found that they are actually quite literally using the Islamic lobbyist talking points at all.
Yeah, what I find amazing is that these guys must think that the Islamic jihadis, the KKK, and the Nazis are the good guys because these people literally repeat word for word the same arguments used by these three groups. So
Well,
if you're repeating Hitler's propaganda, if you're repeating KKK propaganda, and if you're repeating Islamic jihadi propaganda, how are you the good guy?
right. Well, and another point to that is they all have to assume and believe that their audiences are extremely stupid and naive and will never check anything that they say. And so they can just continue to, beat this drum of lies that they repeat and regurgitate. And, they've gotten away with this. All of these guys have gotten away with this, and nobody has fact checked them. So now we're actually going to show the numbers to show how
Yeah,
all of these people are blatant liars and they're duping their audiences into believing, bullcrap. And I fell for this same rhetoric in the past, but this show has always been about fact checking and following the data. And so when you started coming on the show in January, that's when all of these different hosts and whatnot started going crazy because we began questioning the official narrative. Hey, Justin, it's good to see you.
hey Justin. Well, look, true. Either these people are incompetent, or they've duped themselves, or they're lying. Because how do they all get it wrong? I've been looking at the numbers. We've been working on the numbers for a month or so. The numbers do not support anything. The data does not support what they say. These are hard, cold, hard numbers, right? Cold, hard cash. And yeah, I mean, there's more, but we'll fix it. Well, today we're going to have a look at the Islamic lobby, which would be the rival to the supposed Israeli Jewish lobby. But let's get into that. So, yeah, the slideshow that I have is over 50 slides. It could have easily been more, but I had to cut it off somewhere. So let me begin. Um, I'm going to share my screen here. And that's the screen. Let me know if the screen is. I shared my second screen. Is that
Yep.
visible?
Yep, it's visible now.
Okay. So let me. Okay, you can see that full screen.
Yep.
Okay, so today my presentation is about the Islamic lobby, and as you can see from the title, it is invisible, doesn't get discussed. It is extremely powerful, and it is very, very wealthy. It has a lot more money than Israel has. Let's be very blunt. We're going to talk about that. So the Islamic lobby undermines U.S. interests. It has its own interests, and it actually works against U.S. interests. It influences U.S. foreign policy, and it works towards the destruction of Israel. That's one of their positions. And also it promotes hatred and demonization of the Jews, as well as it works to promote Islam and Sharia in America. Right, so these are some of the aims. Now, we don't have time to go into depth into all of these things, but let's continue. So have a look at this quote. So in our culture, we have a saying, in the West, we have a saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. However, our enemies say something different. In their culture, they say, do not let your enemy know he's your enemy. It's a very different set of ideas. It's a very different approach. It is incredibly dishonest. So keep that in mind. They believe, do not let your enemy know he's your enemy. Think about that as we go forward. Okay, so why is there no discussion of this very powerful, very wealthy lobby that competes with the Israeli lobby? Why do we not discuss the Islamic lobby? Well, it's because of two men in a book. So John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt wrote The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy. Very popular book, big bestseller, and they created the prevailing narrative. So this narrative is that there's an all-powerful Israeli lobby that controls the U.S. Middle East policy and conspiratorially controls the US itself. This is the book that hatched that whole idea, this narrative that is pushed by guys like Arab Green, Riyad Dawson, Handsome Twat, and others. So now, interestingly, this book ignored the existence of a rival Arabic Islamic interest. Sorry, I'm very tired tonight. And coincidentally, the truth community also ignores Arab Islamic interests. Is this a coincidence? Well, this book portrayed the Arabs as impotent, unable to affect their own fate or to influence US actions. This is the poor Arabs have no power talking point. They have no money. The Jews have all the money. The Jews have all the power. The Jews are blah, blah.
And the Arabs are
That
the poor victims of everyone else.
correct. So this book is the source of that talking point. So it is also the origin of the Jews control the government talking point, which actually does serve and benefit the Arab lobby. And what we do learn as we go is that the Islamic money promotes this narrative cloaked as pro-Palestinian. The thing is, are they really pro-Palestinian or are they anti-Israeli? Because we'll find that they really are anti-Israeli. So here's my question, though. How did the online quote-unquote truth community all become apologists for Islam and push the Arab lobby line? How did they all start pushing Arab lobby propaganda?
And, and this is why I've never allied with the so-called truth community or the truth movement, because it's not a bowel movement. Truth comes by studying individual facts and looking things up and verifying them. It's not, like everyone going to the bathroom all at once or something like that. It's not a bowel movement. It's not, truth is something that's attained through research, through grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and processing the information and verifying facts. It's not, a bunch of morons regurgitating the same talking points and then attacking anyone who questions those, those talking points.
Yeah, it's not about feelings. Well, look, we do say that facts don't care about your feelings, but sadly, feelings also don't care about your facts.
Correct.
So, typical example from social media. This is the talking point. Israel's population, this I took off Facebook verbatim. Verbatim. Israel's population of just 8 million people comprises about 0.001% of the global population, is the cause of 99% of the conflicts that have occurred since 9/11. The Israeli government, through AIPAC and other Israeli lobbies, have a stranglehold. That's some really interesting NLP there, Jan. You might be able to comment on that again, but AIPAC has a stranglehold. That is purely just a reframing, because stranglehold actually just means they are very popular amongst Americans.
Right.
It just means Israel is very popular.
Well, and we even saw Ilmar, or what's her name? Omar.
Ilhan Omar.
Come out regurgitating this same crap recently to cover up her own agenda. And ironically, she just got caught in an affair this last week. And so, by Sharia law, she needs to be
stoned to death.
Stoned to death, right. So, so what are we going to do about that? I guess the United States is going to have its first stoning in, three, 4 centuries. Right? Yeah. I mean, she wants Sharia, so we have to, concede her own will to her.
Hey, look, I mean, whatever. So it's just a reframe, right? They're very popular. They're just trying to reframe popularity as a stranglehold to give it a negative connotation instead. So they have a stranglehold on all branches and levels of the American government, control 96% of 6 major Western news. Whatever, that sentence doesn't even make sense. Totally controls U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East and elsewhere. That's not a typo.
It's funny that you had just posted that right when you put that on the screen. Somebody in the chat quoted a fake Alan Dershowitz quotes. We run the banks and we run Hollywood and 99% of the media and major universities. So last time you were on, we showed how Islam,
the universities, right?
Islam funds and controls the universities, and now we're showing how they control the lobbying. And we haven't gotten to the media yet, but we've shown how each of these points that these people, just thoughtlessly regurgitate and lap up like dogs to vomit, are just complete crap. And so it makes me
We're going
wonder.
to
It makes me wonder what Alan Dershowitz, and see these people. What they do is they go by a last name, and these people could be Sabbatean Jews or whatever, which are actually crypto Islamists, but it's they go or atheists for that matter, and they go by a last name, and therefore it's proven fact that the Jews do everything.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, we're going to see that story is false. So, through collusion between government and media, collectively, Israel has grossly influenced the hearts and brainwashed minds of the Western world. Well, then, unfortunately, Islam has grossly influenced the hearts and brainwashed minds of the Arabic world by spewing out anti-Israel propaganda and pro-Islamic propaganda on a daily basis. Well, through collusion between government and media, in other words, because they're popular. Right. So with 22 trillion debt and 6 trillion spent on war since 9/11, do you feel you're getting max whack for your buck? I don't. So quick fact check. Since 9/11, there have been. So what is that about Israel has responsible for 99% of the conflicts since 9/11? Let's have a look. So I went and actually counted. I physically counted the numbers today. Since 9/11, there have been 35,570 recorded Islamic Jihad attacks. The number is higher.
Yeah,
However,
and just since 2015, there have been
we'll get to that.
85,000
I'll
murders.
get to that. Let me
All
get to
right.
that too. So the number is actually higher than this, but because this number doesn't record every single instance, but the verified ones are 35,570 recorded Islamic Jihad terror attacks since 9/11. In 2019, in 45 countries, there have been 1,193 Islamic terror attacks, murdering 6,805 people and injuring 7,500 up to the 30th of August 2019. That's 3 days ago. Right, 2018, just under 2,000 attacks in 55 countries with just under 12,000 murdered and 11,500 injured. 2017, over 2,000 attacks in 61 countries, 16,387 murdered, 14,300 injured. 2016, 2,500 attacks, 59 countries, 21,413 murdered, 26,700 injured. 2015, 2,890 attacks in 53 countries, 27,000 murdered, 26,000 injured. That's 84,028 terrorist murders in 10,610 Islamic terror attacks since 2015. And that's up to the 30th of August.
Oh, but wait a second, they're victims. Oh,
Uh,
or they're just fighting back at.
No, they're perpetrators.
Oh, absolutely they are. But I mean, that's just the
So,
official liberal narrative.
so now the Arab lobby has operated unseen. There's no visible public HQ like AIPAC. Now, it should be noted, AIPAC is an American lobby. It's a domestic lobby. It is not foreign money. It is loyal, patriotic Americans who support Israel, who support the Jewish cause for religious and other reasons, and they fund money to support Israel. It is not a foreign lobby, it's an American lobby. It's your neighbors who are funding AIPAC. AIPAC is not taking money from outside. AIPAC is money from inside America, from Americans to help Israel. Now, the Arab lobby operates by stealth. It is barely known to the public and not discussed. Now, their policy is deny everything. James ZOGBY, he wrote in 1982, there is no Arab lobby. Again, deny everything. DePaul University political science professor Khalil Marar, he contacted Arab American organizations for interviews for research on the Arab lobby, and he was told there's no Arab lobby in Washington, D.C. Yet, the Arab lobby is older than the Israeli lobby. It goes back to the Arab National League of America in the 1930s. Israel was only formed in 1948. So this is like 16 years before Israel was founded. There was an Arab lobby in the US. In 1951, King Saud of Saudi Arabia asked the US government to finance a pro-Arab lobby to counter the pro-Israel lobby. The CIA obliged him. So James ZOGBY, let's have a little bit of a closer look. James ZOGBY is the founder, the president of the Arab American Institute, and the author of the book Arab Voices. The mission of the Arab American Institute was to nurture and encourage the direct participation of Arab Americans in political and civic life in the United States. They represent the policy interests of Arab Americans. They promote, when they say Arab Americans, they mean Islamic. They promote Arab American participation in the US electoral system as voters and as candidates, pushing Sharia. They are the liaison between the Arab American community and major national political parties. And also, they have an AAI foundation which combats anti-Arab and anti-Muslim bigotry. In other words, these are Islamophobia merchants. One of the comments I see regularly is that they say, well, Jews have the Jewophobia claim, that you're a, what's that word, Jan?
Islamophobia?
Anti-Semite.
Oh yeah,
And
anti-Semite.
it's claimed that Muslims don't do this and that Islam doesn't do this. Well, they do.
Wait a second. Wait. Are you saying that there's a term like Islamophobia?
No, there isn't. And no one ever gets sent to jail for leaving bacon at a mosque and then gets murdered in jail for the crime of leaving bacon. That's never happened. No one gets pulled into jail. No one gets visited by police. No one gets slapped into court, given fines, and arrested for criticizing Muslims on Twitter. That's never happened, Jan. Except for the dozens and dozens and dozens of times it has. Except for those, it never does. No one. Newspapers don't get shot up and have all their staff murdered for criticizing Islam or drawing cartoons of Muhammad. Never happens. Except for the times that it has, and dozens of people have been killed, except for those occasions. So moving on. Sorry, excuse my sarcasm. So he's a senior advisor to the polling firm ZOGBY International, and he has a very detailed biography. There's a link in the file. He writes a weekly column in 20 Arab newspapers. He has a weekly call-in discussion program called Viewpoint on Abu Dhabi television in the UAE. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Democratic National Committee. He's part of the Resolutions Committee. And he's the co-founder and chairman of the Palestine Human Rights Campaign in the 70s and co-founder and executive director of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, more Islamophobia merchants. So James Zogby runs an Arab lobbying institute, yet claims there is no Arab lobby. Just thought I should mention that. So in the book that was written that defined the narrative, the role of Arab oil money was ignored. Now again, the Arab lobby is older than the Israeli lobby. It started with the Arab National League in the 1930s. And also the Arab lobby is a group of 21 Islamic states plus Palestine. It is led and dominated by Saudi. However, it is represented in the US by oil interests, massively powerful oil companies, very wealthy oil companies, defense contractors who need markets for their products, and corporations with commercial interests in the kingdom, in the Saudi kingdom, and the 21 markets that these countries represent. They have a huge amount of buying power, and thus they have, versus Israel, for instance, they have a lot more people, so therefore they're a much bigger market, which means they can use that as influence. Also, the Pentagon needs them for weapon sales, A, to protect US interests like Iran and previously the former Soviet threat. And also, with more units in the field and maintenance, the Pentagon can lower the unit cost of weapons systems and also extend their production life. So that is a bonus for them. And also, we have the Palestinian question. Now, these people, they say they're lobbying on behalf of Palestinians, but is that true? Because they seem to be lobbying against Israel. And again, there's a link in the presentation that you can look at where that question is raised in a mosque, and they said, no, it's Islamic. It's simply just propaganda. So, question, does Israel require military aid? Well, let's see. Israel has peace treaties with only two of its neighbors, and those are Jordan and Egypt. Technically, it is at war with the rest of the Arab world. Iran is openly hostile, so given the risks and threats, Israel must continue to maintain a strong defense. It is outmanned and also outgunned by its enemies, so it relies on a qualitative advantage. It has 177,000 active Israeli troops versus a combined 2.36 million Islamic troops that oppose it. So 177,000 versus 2.36 million.
Now, I'm not good at math, but isn't 177,000 bigger than 2.36 million? I mean, that's like what we're.
I think 2.36 million is at least double 177,000, if not
least,
like 12,
oh, okay.
13 times larger. So new weapon systems are expensive, and Israel cannot afford them on its own, believe it or not. So aid from the US is vital. So Israel's enemies have numerous suppliers, but Israel relies almost entirely on the US to supply it with weapons. Hence, there's this genocidal agenda to destroy the US-Israel relationship. Any comments from you, Jan?
No, just
Okay,
nothing but
so
sarcastic ones toward the trolls.
let's look at the top 10 US weapons clients. Israel is number one. No, sorry, it's Saudi Arabia. Let's have a look. Saudi Arabia is America's number one weapons customer. You can go through.
Now
You can
that's a problem. Why are we supplying our Arabic enemies or Islamic enemies with weapons? And that's a question that comes up
That's a
often.
question. You tell me. Let's have a look. The USA's biggest arms exporters. So let's
Okay,
see.
wait. So you're saying that Israel is not number one? Wait a second.
Israel's not even in the top 10. Israel's not even in the top
But
10.
and we also sell to the United Kingdom. I mean, we used to be subjugated by them. They're a strong enemy.
So have a look at this. There are four Islamic countries in the top 10 in terms of US arms export partners. Saudi Arabia is number one. It's twice as big as the nearest partner, which is Australia. But then you've got the UAE at just under 7 billion. You've got Saudi. Well, so these numbers vary, right? I mean, there've been sales of like 30, 48, 50 billion to these countries. But let's look. I mean, so 2009 to 2018, I think in million TIV, who knows what these trend indicator values. So anyway, Saudi Arabia is twice as big as the nearest partner. UAE is third, Iraq is fifth, and then Turkey, right? And you have Japan, Taiwan, and the UK. Israel doesn't even appear in the top 10. They're not even near that. And from 2009 to 2018, the biggest arms export receiver from the US was Saudi Arabia, 9 years in a row.
So that they can kill and subjugate, people who question the royal Saudi family, etc.
So now the Israeli lobby actually reflects the will of the Americans. For instance, let's go back in 1974. The Joint Chiefs Chairman, General George Brown, attacked the Jewish lobby and he criticized the Jewish ownership of banks and newspapers. So at that time, a Democratic Senator, Thomas McIntyre, member of the Armed Services Committee, acknowledged the influence of the Israeli lobby. And he said that it reflects the will of a strong majority of Americans. It does. And then he said, what about the oil lobby? He asked. The influence of big oil is far more insidious and far more pervasive than the influence of the Jewish lobby, for oil and influence seep across ideological as well as party lines without public approval or support. So think about it. You have these 21 countries in the Arab lobby. You've got the major oil producers and exporters, and everybody wants a slice of that pie. It's a very, very lucrative business. Israel has no oil. He said the Jewish lobby isn't in the same league with the general's own lobby, the Pentagon and the defense establishment, who want to sell weapons to these 21 countries who have a lot more buying clout than does one tiny little Israel. I know the theory is Israel has unlimited money, but no, that is not the case. The figures, nowhere do the figures prove that. The data absolutely says that these people are lying to you. So the Arab lobby has worldwide reach. So since the establishment of Israel in 1948, the Arab lobby, basically an anti-Israel lobby, has grown to include defense contractors, former government officials who are employed by all 21 Arab states. These are Americans and UK citizens, European citizens, employed by 21 Arab states to lobby, buy, and sell on their behalf. These are corporations with business interests in the Middle East, NGOs. Hello, George Soros. The United Nations resolutions ad nauseam. Okay, I'll skip the UN stuff. That's a good grief. Academics, particularly from Islam-funded university Middle East studies departments. We're going to get into that in this talk. Israel haters and a significant percentage of media and cultural elite basically toe the Arab lobby line. And of course, you've got Christian, anti-Jewish, anti-Israel groups who cloak themselves as anti-Zionists. And then you've got leaders and diplomats from all these governments. And of course, the OIC. We're not here to go into detail on those, but I will cover some of them in detail as we go. The Arab lobby has no popular support. It doesn't. That's why they need to use propaganda and money to buy people. Any comment?
Well, that's blatantly obvious. I mean, but here's the thing: is you have people like you say Arab Green and Rhea Dawson and Brendan O'Connell, all of these handsome twat, all of these people who are out there spreading as much pro-Islamic propaganda that they can, while claiming that everything is the Jews, and that's the big cover-up.
Well, once we get to the numbers and the graphs and the charts, we'll see that. So the Arab lobby has worked to influence U.S. policy for 90 years. Okay, it lobbies directly and it pays people to to buy their loyalty. The Bush family, that's the George Bush and Sons family, owned at least $1.47 billion from Saudi Arabia. Right? The Clinton family has made tens of millions of dollars.
And by the way, the Saudi government was funding the Clinton
we'll get to that, yeah.
Foundation. Yeah, okay.
We'll get to that. And then indirectly, they also manipulate the media. They propagandize the American educational system to the detriment of national interests in the US. See our Muslim Brotherhood Part 2 propaganda and funding episode. But we're going to cover that here as well. And they've sunk more than $2.5 billion into American universities for Islamic dawah since 2011. And also, they've placed the agents. The Saudis have placed their agents into the US government. The last episode I did, again, Muslim Brotherhood Part 2, Propaganda and Funding, Huma Abedin, her family works directly for, let me actually bring that up. I'm going to load the file here. So Huma Abedin's family shares an office with the Muslim World League. The Muslim World League is Saudi Arabia's government agency that spreads Islamic dawah, their Salafi doctrine, as what is the name of their particular brand? For some reason, it slipped my mind. They're Salafists. They are their particular brand of Islam, Wahhabism. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
So the Muslim World League is basically spreads Wahhabism. Huma Abedin has worked for the same. Well, her father and the Muslim World League set up a business in the same office, which was funded by the head of the Muslim World League, and her family still works for them. She worked for them in the past, and the Muslim World League owns their company. The Muslim World League spreads Wahhabist doctrine. Huma Abedin worked for them. Her family still works for them. She is a Saudi agent. Her job is Islamic dawah, and yet she's a member of the U.S. government. Explain that. Okay, so Americans are generally pro-Israel. If we look at if we look here at the stats, we'll see that Arabs are not very popular. Okay, U.S. policy is pro-Israel because Americans are pro-Israel, not because of AIPAC. Okay, it's not because of AIPAC. It's simply because Israel is popular. Okay, American sympathies for Israel match an all-time high. It's not because of propaganda. It is purely
because they have freedom of speech. They have, they don't stone women to death for adultery, etc. So
women can drive. Muslims in Israel have more rights than they do in Arab countries. And so this is the structure of the Arab lobby, just basically. So you've got the Saudi lobby, which is really the big one, the oil industry, defense contractors, academics, former government officials, Arab Americans, large groups of them, and Islamic groups, Christians, and of course the Arab domestic lobby. So, okay, so Muslims have no money and power. So from this interview, we'll be touching on this on occasion. In 2017, the Arab lobby contacted every single senator who are on the appropriations committees, the foreign affairs committees, and the armed services committees multiple times, right? So all of those who are directly making decisions about whether or not arms deals, multi-billion-dollar arms deals, are going to go through with the government. On the other side of it is a massive public relations campaign, and that's very much focused on pushing Saudi Arabia's reform agenda, basically cleaning up their image. Now, I get called a Hasbara troll, but people somehow don't speak about dawah trolls, because Saudi Arabia is doing a lot of dawah trolling and portraying them as a valuable ally within the Middle East. Okay, fine. So now let's start looking. The Arab lobby in America and influence over the US. Okay, the Arab lobby is one of the strongest in America, even stronger than Israel's. Okay, and that's Alan Dershowitz and how Arab governments influence US politics. It's time to silence the Saudi lobbying machine in Washington. You can look these articles up and read them for yourself. So firms registered under the Foreign Agents Registration Act reported receiving more than $40 million from Saudi Arabia in 2017 and 2018. Saudi lobbyists have contacted Congress, the executive branch, media outlets, and think tanks more than 4,000 times. Okay, they must be doing it for some reason. Saudi Arabia has amassed one of the largest and well-funded influence operations in the United States. It is pumping cash into think tanks and elite American universities across the nation. Okay. Report says Saudi Arabia hired lobbyists and give millions to influence US Congress. A Saudi prosecutor. So here we go. The Saudis have poured money into lobbying for decades. What makes the US-Saudi relationship so special? Weapons, oil, and an army of lobbyists. Okay, and so despite the killing of Adnan Khashoggi, the lucrative relationship is unlikely to die anytime soon. Now, lots of people lost their marbles over Adnan Khashoggi being killed in the Saudi embassy in Turkey. However, he was a Muslim Brotherhood asset, and they are antithetical to the Saudi government. And of course, the Saudis killed him. Now, but we'll get more into that. The Royal Touch, the Saudi lobby juggernaut, Salon.com. That's a leftist magazine. Lots of these are actually taken from leftist articles. Khashoggi is a shining, so diplomatic crisis spotlights Saudi Arabia's spending in Washington. Why does Arab Green not talk about this? I wonder. Khashoggi is shining a spotlight on how integral the country and its cash have become to Washington, with lobbying firms, think tanks, and investors. The Saudis have exerted influence in Washington for decades. Millions on lobbying firms to high-powered, also sending high-powered members of the royal family to serve as ambassadors and social figures. Doled out cash to think tanks, media organizations, and so on. Saudi Arabian lobbyists have many friends in DC. The Saudi government and affiliates have spent millions of dollars on the US law, lobby, and public relations firms to raise the country's visibility in the US and before the United Nations. How much Saudi Arabia spends to influence public opinion. The Khashoggi outcry may spur Saudis to step up their already powerful lobbying. So far, I'm not seeing any articles that talk about how they have no power, but we'll get more specifically into this. Saudi lobbying in the US has tripled since Trump took office. Part of that is that countries tend to spend more when relationships sour in Washington. The reason they're having to spend more is that obviously Trump is not that friendly towards them, so they're having to work a lot harder. Saudi lobbying in the US tripled during Trump's first year in office. They spent $27 million on lobbying in 2017. Now, notice the conflicting numbers already that have come up, because the numbers that are reported are not accurate. Unfortunately, the FARA agency that records the lobbying numbers doesn't keep proper numbers. Oddly enough, with Israel, you've got accurate, consistent numbers. With Saudi, you do not. We'll talk more about that as we go. Notice they have no power. So House of Bush, House of Saud. 2 days after 9/11, US air traffic was very heavily restricted. 140 Saudis, these were Saudi royals and family of Osama bin Laden, were permitted to leave the US and thus escaped questioning by US intelligence. All the answers, everything needed to dismantle Osama bin Laden's organization can be found in Saudi Arabia. John O'Neill, FBI counterterror expert and head of security at the World Trade Center, who died there. In the 1970s, the oil-rich House of Saud began courting American politicians in a bid for military protection, influence, and investment. With the Bush family, they hit a gusher. Any comments or questions from you, Jan?
No.
Okay, so let's look at Bush-Saudi business ties just in brief. We're going to gloss over these, but Saudi investment in the Carlyle Group, the private equity firm whose rainmakers include George Bush Sr., who was a former CIA director. Then we've got Saudi Prince Bandar, nicknamed Bandar Bush, who was ambassador to the US from 1983 to 2005. It's 22 years. And he's the former head of Saudi intelligence. No, oddly enough, he was promoted to head of Saudi intelligence after 9/11. He donated $1 million to the G.H.W. Bush Presidential Library. Bandar Bush, his father was Saudi defense minister. He's a close friend with the elder Bush for more than 20 years. They went hunting and fishing together. And President Bush wrote, "You're my friend for life." He wrote, in 1992, "I feel like you're one of my family. You're like one of our own." And also they gave lucrative contracts to Halliburton when Dick Cheney was CEO. And of course, the main law firm retained by the Saudis to defend them against the 9/11 families court case, which is now that the 9/11 families are suing Saudi for their role in 9/11, is Baker Botts, which is the James Baker firm, which is the Bush family advisor and counsel. And here's the question in Salon again. Did the Saudis buy a president? Money has flowed from the House of Saud to the Bush family, at least $1.47 billion. If the Saudis had been happy with the presidency of George H.W. Bush, and they were, they must have been ecstatic because of George Bush. So the relationship between the two dynasties had come a long way. Let's have a brief look at Prince Bandar bin Sultan, known as Bandar Bush. Nelson Mandela spoke very well of him. So he's the nephew of former King Fahd bin Abdulaziz Al Saud of Saudi Arabia. He has a private jet which has landing rights at RAF Bryce Norton Base, which is the largest Royal Air Force base in the UK. He has no influence, no political power, clearly no money, because he can't afford to park his plane at a regular airport, so he only parks it at a military base. Let's see. This is Bandar Bush, right? This is him with Tony Blair. This is a photograph with an inscription from George Bush written on it. It was a terrific fight, but you managed to land this giant fight. You know, congratulations, ambassador and friend. And that's from George Bush to Bandar Bush. That would be in the 80s.
You know, of course, Bush Sr. was another DCI head of the CIA, so that's very telling. I mean, the CIA is constantly tied in with these Islamic agendas.
Yeah. So there's Bandar Bush and George Bush again in much more recent times. That's him with Nelson Mandela. He's no money, no influence, no friends. Him and Putin. That's him and George H.W. Bush again. That's him and Putin again. So this man is influence. He has clout. So he has personal relationships with the leaders of Russia, China, Syria, Great Britain, and others, right? And he's also Saudi Arabia's most famous arms dealer. He's the former ambassador to the US, the former head of Saudi intelligence, and he was recently detained as part of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's so-called corruption purge. He bought an entire village in the Cotswolds, which is an area in Oxfordshire in England, and he bought a 2,500-acre estate with the proceeds from kickbacks he received in an arms deal, which netted British manufacturer BAE $56.5 billion in contracts. So he made at least $30 million on that, okay? But yet the case was dropped in the UK in 2006 after an intervention by Prime Minister Tony Blair. Rather, there was a case against him in the UK in 2006, but Tony Blair stepped in and made the case go away. So clearly he's got no money, no power, no friends, no influence. So last year, survivors of the 9/11 attacks wrote to British Prime Minister Theresa May, urging her to make public a British government report into the extent of Saudi Arabia's funding of Islamic extremism in the UK, because this was material evidence which would be useful in the trial, in the 9/11 families trial. And of course, the UK government refuses to release the report on Islamic extremism. And the Home Secretary, accused of putting our so-called friendship with Saudi Arabia above our values as Brits, actually cites national security for keeping the investigation secret. So the UK government has stepped forward to protect Saudi Arabia. The UK government has stepped forward to protect Bandar. So Labour Friends of Saudi Arabia, that's the Labour Party, Friends of Saudi Arabia, says critics are Islamophobes. I thought there was only the case of anti-Semitism, but no. So apparently anyone who criticizes Saudi Arabia are Islamophobes. Labour Friends of Saudi Arabia accuse the critics of the theocratic dictatorship of Islamophobia. So interesting that they've got clout in very interesting places. So given the evidence so far, are you sure that the Arabs and Muslims have no political influence, as we are told by commentators? I'll pause there for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, it must be true that AIPAC and Israel are the true power. I mean, you know, and all of these super Jews, you know,
Yeah.
because, you know, with all of the power that all of these conspiracy liars in the so-called truth movement put out there, the Jews must be, you know, superhuman people. And, you know, how much of the population are they? 0.001% or whatever. And they have so much more. These 14.5 to 16 million Jews must be superheroes to be able to dominate 1.4 to 1.8 billion Muslims. I mean, that seems clear. They are absolute superpowers, superheroes, whatever. They would have to be 14.5 million Supermen, you know, and maybe Batman, Robin, Spider-Man, etc.
So the narrative makes a lovely story, but it makes very poor facts. So here's the here's the Saudi king with George Bush. And here's George Bush Jr. with the Saudi king. That's them again and again, again. Clearly no relationship, clearly no close ties, clearly they aren't friends. The only whole, oh, that was a mistake, but yeah, whatever, that guy.
Oh, you mean
So,
what's Barack Hussein Obama's naming again?
so interesting. So Barak is an Islamic name. I know everyone focused on Hussein, but Barak is actually an Islamic name. It means blessed. And Hussein means, what is the meaning of Hussein? It means handsome or good or beautiful.
A-
So
And
Barack
then
Hussein,
what was Obama?
I can't remember, but Barack Hussein are both Arab Islamic names.
But wait, he went to a church using Takia, so therefore he must be Christian.
Yeah, but both his fathers were Muslim, and he grew up in a mosque. So he attended mosque and he attended the Islamic madrasa. So
And there's photos of him wearing Islamic
yeah,
garb
yeah,
too.
correct. So at least 1.47 billion went from the Saudis to Bush. Now, notice it says in this article, never before in history has a presidential candidate, much less a presidential candidate and his father, a former president and CIA director, been so closely tied financially and personally to the ruling family of another foreign power. Never before had a president's personal fortunes and public policies been so deeply entwined with another nation. Now, I'm assuming that all these guys who talk to me about the Muslims have no power and Riyad Dawson and Arab Green just forgot and overlooked this just as a coincidence, just coincidence. So, I mean, are they this close with Netanyahu? Don't think so. Are they busy holding hands and marching around the garden? No, I don't think so. So, foreign interest spending. Okay, this is investment from foreign investors in lobbying in the US. Is Israel number one? Let's find out. So foreign interests have spent over 530 million influencing US policy and public opinion since 2017. The number one spender since 2017 at $70.5 million is, ladies and gentlemen, I give you South Korea. The number two spender with 51.4 million since 2017 is Japan. And the overblown claims against the Israeli Jewish lobbying and spending are just that, overblown. So let's have a look. East Asian lobbying. About $3 out of every $10 spent on foreign lobbying in the US originates from East Asian countries, specifically South Korea, Japan, China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. These five countries spend a combined 158.2 million since 2017. Which is nearly half of the remaining 374 million spent by the remaining 128 countries. So these five countries outspend the remaining 128. The South Korean government has spent 54.2 million since 2018 on US lobbying, ranking first amongst foreign principals. So they have separations between foreign principals like an individual, a group, or a government, and so on. They have different categories. So let's have a look. The top 10 countries by spending since 2017. You have South Korea as number one, the UAE at number three, the Cayman Islands, Saudi Arabia. Now notice you've got Saudi Arabia and the UAE in the top 10. Now we know that because they're part of the Arab lobby, they work together, so you have to combine their totals. Once you combine their totals, they are very near to number one. Israel is at number four, as we can see. Now, with the Cayman Islands, the question is how much of this is Saudi money? Because there are certain countries, Cayman Islands, Bermuda, Luxembourg, Belgium, where they have funds and no one really knows who's in those funds. And those funds are used for lobbying purposes, but they're not direct, unfortunately. So yeah, there are certain countries where dirty money goes. And Cayman Islands happens to be one of them. Now, notice the top 10 foreign principals by spending 2017, 2018. You've got government of Qatar, government of Abu Dhabi, which is the UAE, government of Saudi Arabia, and government of the Cayman Islands. Notice that Israel has the first 10 spots. Israel is number one. No, it's not. It's not even in the top 10. Oops, how did they not get in there? I thought they were number one. Everyone was screaming about it. So no, you have the government of Beijing, you have the Marshall Islands. Seriously, the Marshall Islands are up there at number 4 or 5. Ireland, tourism island, number 3, biggest spender and the question is, of the Cayman Islands, even of the Marshall Islands, even in Ireland, because a lot of black money gets laundered through that, how much of this is Saudi money?
And
Okay,
there,
notice
I
how,
mean, there's no way to even know that unless we were able to dig through those bank accounts to
yeah,
see,
but how does Tourism Island spend more than Israel does? Good grief. I thought, you'd think that the top 10 places were all taken by Israel. But anyway, then it's not. It's not even in the top 10. Okay, so the top lobby groups. Let's look at this. 7 of the top 20 registrants are trade or tourism related. 69 firms earned 73 million through foreign contracts. The number one firm, okay, a quarter of that income went to Aiken Gum Strauss Feld, and their top client for 2018 was the United Arab Emirates. Podesta Group was number two. Now, in 2018, the Podesta Group wound down its business because the firm dissolved foreign scrutiny investigation over their foreign lobbying activities, potentially illegal foreign lobbying activities. And you can see that they were number two in this list. Okay. And these guys, oddly enough, were very, very tight with Saudi Arabia. So if you look at that article, you'll find they had a direct link to the Saudi royal court. Podesta worked directly for the Saudi royal court. And what's interesting is that Tony Podesta was a registered foreign agent on the Saudi payroll, right? And the Saudis were hiring lobbyists and PR experts like crazy. John Podesta, his brother, chaired Hillary's presidential campaign. So who is Tony Podesta? Russia probe investigating brother of Hillary Clinton campaign chair. And there's old Mueller. And that was in Newsweek. So you tell me, dirty, clean? Tony Podesta personally managed the Saudi lobbying account, and they received $140,000 a month from the Saudi government. John Podesta also served as President Bill Clinton's chief of staff. So he might have had a few connections. You never know. You can see that he's chief of staff. That's in the archive of the website. And he was a counselor to President Obama, and he founded a think tank that pushes Saudi Arabian propaganda. Okay, that's the Center for American Progress. So he was chief of staff to Bill Clinton and counselor to Barack Obama. Let's have a look. Okay, so Saudi Arabia's influence network in Washington. Let's look at Hillary Clinton a little bit. So the Clinton Foundation has taken tens of millions of dollars from countries that the State Department criticized for their records on sex discrimination and other human rights issues. Hillary had no problem with that. These countries include Saudi, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, Brunei, and Algeria. As we know, Brunei had to step down from their plans to stone people to death because of international
gays and
outcry.
transgenders, yeah,
And adulterers and children,
right.
hands cut off, feet cut off for theft and so on. Yeah, they had to step back from that apparently because of an international outcry. And that was based strictly, as they said, on the Quran and Sharia. Saudi Arabia has been a generous benefactor. We know they've given at least $25 million to the Clinton Foundation. $1 million more was donated by the Friends of Saudi Arabia, right, which was founded with a Saudi crown prince. And he was Saudi Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and third son of the former king. So, yeah. And then Saudi Arabia, this is from the current king of Saudi Arabia. He stated in a Jordan newspaper that Saudi Arabia has funded 20% of Hillary's presidential campaign. The question earlier was, did the Saudis buy a president? Well, were they trying to buy another one? Saudi Arabia has funded 20%.
Well, and then Trump, it was, is a self-made billionaire, so he didn't need all of that Islamic money.
No, the Saudis gave Trump a whole $6,000.
$6,000, and how much did they give Hillary?
20. Well, she spent over $1 billion in her campaign, so they gave her over 200 million.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but 6,000 is more than 200 million, right? I mean, if you're a liberal like Arab Green and Jesse Spotswood Moorfield and Rhea Dawson and
doing SJW maths, yeah.
yeah, that's a perfect way to put it. SJW math, correct? Where math isn't based on facts and numbers; it's based on emotion.
Yeah. So Hillary Clinton, right? Saudi Arabia and ISIS. What are the connections between these guys? Let's have a look. WikiLeaks has always been a reliable source of information. They've never been proven to be wrong. So Julian Assange tells us ISIS and the Clinton Foundation are both funded by Saudi Arabia and Qatar, right? So he was interviewed by John Pilgrim in the UK, and he said, ISIS is created largely with money from people who are giving money to the Clinton Foundation. And Assange said yes. Now, the below is an email that was from the WikiLeaks email dump. I have a copy of the original email. We'll come into that in a moment. That WikiLeaks put out. This was the Hillary Clinton email dump, the 30,000 emails that they published. And Hillary writes, while this paramilitary operation is moving forward, we need to use our diplomatic and more traditional intelligence assets to bring pressure on the government of Qatar and Saudi Arabia, which are providing clandestine financial and logistic support to ISIS and other radical Sunni groups in the region. So what does she do? So now notice it says here in this email as well from this WikiLeaks post, Qataris and Saudis have an ongoing competition to dominate the Sunni world. They're busy fighting it out as to who is going to influence the Sunni world. Blood money. Notice how Qatar bought off the entire DC establishment. Seems like they have some money to do some buying of politicians. I don't know. So Khashoggi, a Saudi author who penned opinion columns in the Washington Post. He's Muslim Brotherhood. He's known to be Muslim Brotherhood. He's a Saudi Muslim Brotherhood agent who penned opinion columns in the Washington Post that were favorable to the Muslim Brotherhood, was a Qatari asset. He was a Qatari agent. Moving on. So WikiLeaks revealed that Hillary said in 2009, more needs to be done since Saudi Arabia remains a critical financial support base for Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, Lashkar-e-Taiba, and other terror groups. So what did she do? She authorized the sale of enormous quantities of weapons to them. And on Christmas Eve in 2011, they celebrated that huge celebration because they just sold $30 billion of F-15 fighter jets, 80 of them manufactured by Boeing, to Saudi. Coincidentally, Boeing contributed $900,000 to the Clinton Foundation. So why did the Saudi regime and other Gulf tourneys donate millions to the Clinton Foundation? Well, for favors, political favors, you know. So U.S. military vets, so the Department of Justice, now this is very interesting. Again, I keep getting told they have no influence, they have no power. Well, the Department of Justice fails to pursue allegations of Saudi lobbying misconduct. So the 9/11 families, so the Saudis hired a firm, they paid them millions of dollars to get veterans and have these veterans lobby without knowing they were being paid by Saudi Arabia to lobby against the Jastid law, which is the law that allows American families who had lost family in 9/11 to sue the Saudi government and pursue legal action against the Saudi government. So they tricked these people into lobbying on behalf of Saudi Arabia. These were from US military veterans. You can look that up, okay? And of course, nothing happened. And there's no disclosures. The disclosures were not made. So former FBI agent Kenneth Williams says that the FBI was told not to help 9/11 victims build a case against Saudi Arabia because warm relations with the Saudi kingdom comes first. The word Israel is not in there, but Saudi does appear, oddly enough. And so Senator Bob Graham said that this is a fundamental assault on the principle of democracy, and the FBI's priority was protecting the US-Saudi relationship. Now, Qatar, Mike Cernovich said, and he put out some very good information, all these Never Trump people are on Qatar's payroll. So state funding from Qatar, right, was funding an information campaign which was directed at shaping American public opinion. The Brookings Institute and all of the Never Trump people were on the Qatari payroll. Al Jazeera and AJ Plus propagandize Americans every day from a terrorist nation, right? And in 2016, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, held a slot in the top tier of donors as well, right? So in other words, the Never Trump people are being funded by the Islamic Arab lobby. Qatar has been paying top dollar to influence American politics and media in ways that would make Rachel Maddow apoplectic if Qatar was spelled Russia. I mean, Russians spent what, $40,000? These guys are spending like hundreds of millions, but whatever. So in 2013, let's go back in history a little bit. 2013, the Israeli government spent a whopping $1,250 on US lobbying. The Israeli government, now I will say that AIPAC spent about $3 million that year, but that is US money, domestic lobby. Those are Americans who like Israel who spent money. The Israeli government itself barely spent a cent. The UAE, however, spent $14.2 million. lobbying the US government, which is 11,360 times more than Israel spent. And for 2013, these are the top 10 countries that were paying for US influence. If we look here, you will see that's the UAE. I lived there for 11 years. Great country, loved it. But yeah. So, any questions or comments from you?
To me, on that last slide, it looked like we better start worrying about Canada and Mexico too.
Oh yeah, Canada. Oh, Canada was one of the top spenders. Yeah, one of the big spenders.
Well, then, we're going to be. I don't want to go around saying A. I mean, we should definitely fight that.
You're right. You're right. You don't. You don't want to say A. You
A,
don't.
A. And then you'd be watching bad movies about beer and stuff.
You're right. Bosnia spent more. Israel didn't even appear in the top.
Well,
10
Bosnia is an Islamic country, so I used to.
Azerbaijan.
Right.
Yeah.
I used to live in former Yugoslavia. I made it to the border of Bosnia one day, but I didn't go in. We weren't allowed.
Okay, well, yeah, I don't plan to go there anytime soon. But notice these top 10 countries. Again, so the story about the overwhelming money and the dominance of the Israeli lobby just isn't it.
And by the way, we do have a number of Bosnian listeners, so not poking fun at you guys, just making a joke there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I live in Poland. I mean, what the heck? I and for my Polish listeners, I will speak very slowly and use small words.
Oh yeah, so Justin Lee says blame Canada. I mean that's correct. And what really bothers me is those flappy heads they have.
Yeah. So Hillary Clinton, okay. So $1 million payment was made in 2011, okay, through the Clinton Foundation, made by Qatar, right, along with Saudi, who were the main sources of funding to the jihadis who were trying to overthrow and replace Bashar al-Assad. The royals, now here's the interesting thing about Syria. The royals from Qatar and Saudi want to pipeline their oil and gas into Europe and displace the other oil and gas giant, Russia, in the world's largest energy market, the EU. Russia and Syria are allies. I don't recall seeing that in the news, but hey, whatever. So,
well, that just goes to prove that Hillary Clinton's not a traitor. I mean, if you're using SJW liberal logic,
Yeah, I know, exactly. So a Moscow-based technology initiative funded in part by the Russian government funneled tens of millions of dollars into the Clinton Foundation, while Hillary Clinton was serving as Secretary of State.
And then what they did was they spun everything against Trump when it's clear that the real Russia collusion was with the Clinton campaign.
Yeah, I mean, they made at least $150 million. So, but yeah, that's another story for another day. From Russia with money, how the Clinton cartel in Silicon Valley got filthy rich upgrading the Russian military. Communists in Silicon Valley, who would have thought? Moving on, donations to the Clinton Foundation and a Russian uranium takeover. Oh, this guy donates $31.3 million to the Clinton Foundation. Add that to the other tens of millions plus the $150 million, and soon that adds up to a little bit of money. Saudi influence on Hillary Clinton, suspected bribe by Saudi Arabia and Qatar paid to Bill Clinton while Hillary was Secretary of State. Interesting. Clinton Foundation's ties to financiers of terrorism. Saudi has paid more than 20% of the cost of Clinton's presidential campaign. Saudi Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was quoted as saying Sunday in a news report by the Jordanian Petro News Agency. He's currently king of Saudi now. Very, very interesting. So they spent how much money funding Hillary? No money, no influence. Does money buy anything? No, it doesn't. Foreign governments, so arms sales okayed by Hillary Clinton's State Department raised questions. So countries that donated to the Clinton Foundation saw a doubling of the amount of arms they were allowed to buy. Saudi Arabia went from 4 billion to 8 billion in 2010 to 2012, okay, including 30 billion worth of fighter jets, and it's gone up since then. Now notice, Epstein, $56 million Upper East Side mansion where Epstein allegedly abused girls, has photos of Bill Clinton and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Isn't that odd? Moving on. Hillary Clinton sent an email to John Podesta, who was then counselor to Barack Obama, and said Saudi Arabia and Qatar are both giving financial and logistical support to the Islamic State. Did she say Israel? No, she didn't. She said Saudi Arabia and Qatar. That's according to WikiLeaks. And what's
Now,
interesting, Qatar
WikiLeaks has never been proved wrong, have they?
have never been proven wrong. Exactly. Qatar and Saudi Arabia are providing clandestine financial and logistical support to ISIS, and our supposed Mideast allies are funding our terrorist foes. So Saudi and Qatar are funding the enemies of the West. And notice there was a $5 million gift to the Clinton Foundation from Qatar, and Saudi over $25 million. So the question from this is that the Clinton Foundation and Clinton knew, and Barack Obama knew, and the Podesta knew that Qatar and Saudi are financing terrorists, but they took their money anyway. And also, does this kind of money have a major impact on US policy, especially under Clinton, who's taking hundreds of millions from them? So here's one of the original emails. This is an original email from the WikiLeaks, so unclassified US State Department. Okay. And this is, now notice this. I thought that Israel has a special, no, they don't. This. So Cheryl Mills writes to Hillary that with Saudi, we may have different standards. With Saudi Arabia, we have different standards. And then we, the Department of State, the US government, the Department of State and the US government have different standards we apply when it is pushing Saudi. When doing things on behalf of Saudi, they have different standards. And then Hillary Clinton writes back from hrod17@clintonemail.com, no doubt about that. Saudi is treated with priority. That is from official State Department emails on Hillary's server. Saudi is given special treatment in the US government. Okay, moving on. So FARA funding, right? Foreign funding. So Israel number one on this list at 99 million, but then you've got Saudi and the UAE, and they top 101 million when combined. And then you've got the Marshall Islands over here. So you've got the Marshall Islands, which is these guys here, and they've got $53 million. So that could well be Saudi money. And in fact, who knows how much of this island is Saudi money? Bermuda, come on, Bermuda, another 40 million. How much of that is Saudi money? We don't know, but it may well be, right? So they're ready. So let's have a look. But the top 10 foreign principals, Saudi government is number 2. Bermuda is number 1 somehow. And then Israel falls down to number 6. So, and the Marshall Islands is in there as well, and the Bahamas. Who knows? So no, Israel is not consistently number 1. And in fact, if you combine the Arab lobby spend, it is way, way more. And we're going to get into how much more. So FARA funding. So these are some of the official stats. 23.5 million, 2017 to 2019, spent by the Israeli government itself. Actual government spending. Okay. And when we look at Saudi, we have 34 million, 23 million, 34 million, except notice the Saudi figures are lacking. There's a lack of reporting. And unfortunately, the law is lax here and they can get away with it. So are there discrepancies? Yes, there are. Okay. So Saudi spent 19 million. Now we've seen figures of 30 million, 19 million, 40 million. We've seen different numbers for Saudi, but the act is not well enforced. There's voluntary compliance. And here's what this guy says, and the law is not properly clarified, but when non-governmental witnesses, particularly think tank experts, are asked to testify, they have to disclose foreign funding received within the last 2 years as it relates to the country they're testifying against or for, right? But of course, because the law is so leaky, they don't have to tell the judge, well, actually, I received $2 million from Saudi, but let me tell you about Saudi Arabia. So unfortunately, these people are being paid by these foreign Arab countries, but they don't disclose it. They're not forced to disclose it, and yet they are giving evidence for or against these countries. That's a major conflict of interest, and it's not enforced. So we know that these think tanks who specialize in Middle Eastern policies receive millions of dollars from Saudi, Qatar, and the UAE, and they do have an interest, and these fundings go undisclosed, and it's a long-standing practice. So, Saudi lobby juggernaut. We are 3/4 done, so I've got about 15 more slides to go, and then we'll be done. So, the Saudi lobby juggernaut. Any questions from you, Ian, before I go on?
No.
Any questions in the comments that I missed?
No.
Okay, so lobby to contend with. That's the Saudi lobby. $100 million, okay, to improve public perceptions and retain their influence in the US Capitol, right? They launched the equivalent of a full court press and an aggressive campaign. The Saudis spent $100 million, right, to make sure that they were getting favorable coverage in the US, right? This is Dawa spend. In 2017, that number tripled to 27.3 million. And that's just a baseline figure for a far larger operation to buy influence in Washington, because it does not include considerable sums given to elite universities or to think tanks. Now, we know they've spent roughly $100 million in the last 2 to 3 years on lobbying. The thing is that they've spent closer to 400 or 600 million.
But wait a second, though. Israel spent $1,200
in 2013. Yeah, $1,250.
What did they spend last year? Do you have any idea?
23 million.
Okay.
And Saudi spent about 34. So let's have a look. Saudi influence operations, the Saudi agents next door. So Americans, I have a list. I can actually sort the list of names. There's about 70 or 80 people on that list, all paid by Saudi Arabia to basically get the 9/11 trial to stop. And they're influencing and lying to Americans to do so. They're undermining a new law that cleared the way for 9/11 families and survivors to sue Saudi Arabia for its support of Al-Qaeda. So Saudi Arabia has spent millions trying to keep 9/11 families and survivors from presenting evidence against the kingdom. The kingdom's campaign to keep evidence of its links to 9/11 out of court has been marked by deceptive premises and misconduct. And of course, no prosecution against them for it. So do they influence US media? Well, yeah, CNN. The network is seriously compromising its journalism in the Gulf states by blurring the line between advertising and journalism, right? And it says here, and that's here, between advertising and editorial, why CNN didn't air its own iRevolution documentary. It was critical of Saudi Arabia. Okay, so CNN bends over for the Saudis. Penske Media is silent on a 200 million Saudi investment after Jamal Khashoggi's disappearance. Favorable coverage for Saudi. Billionaire Saudi prince, Fox News co-owner. Fox News co-owner. I thought the Jews own the media, yeah?
That's what I was told. I mean, if I just regurgitate stuff and lick up vomit, that's what we're told to believe, right?
Yeah. So Fox News co-owner arrested in Saudi Arabia, corruption crackdown.
If you're Adam Green or I mean Arab Green or Roa Ria Dawson and
Riyadh Dawson, yeah,
all these guys, that's what you just repeat these same talking points. I mean, you know, they don't actually have evidence; they have a list. So if we repeat that list, yeah, it's just
So Bin Talal regularly appears on CNBC offering investment advice. I guess they have no control in the media. Do they influence? Well, Bin Talal has also invested in U.S. corporate entities Citigroup, 21st Century Fox, and Twitter, and Apple, amongst others. Notice he used to own more of Twitter than Jack Dorsey. That probably just a coincidence. Doesn't mean anything.
Well, yeah, because, I mean, you know, Joe Rogan and Jack Dorsey taking down, I mean, going after Jack Dorsey specifically, shutting down any pro-Trump support and any conservative voices, that wouldn't have to do anything at all with the Prince of Saudi Arabia owning more of Twitter than him, because, you know, I mean, they have to support Hillary just because, you know, that's the SJW agenda, right?
Right. Arrest of Saudi billionaire Prince shines light on U.S. holdings, Citigroup, Twitter, and Apple. Okay, fine. So what about tech in Silicon Valley? So who is the single biggest investor in U.S. Silicon Valley?
It's got to be Israel, right? I mean, because the Jews are super people. They're like Superman.
Yeah, well, let's have a look. The kingdom, the Saudi kingdom, is now the single largest investor in U.S. startups.
What? But that can be true because Adam Green told me it was Israel.
Saudi Arabia
and Ugly Lies, you know, he regurgitates that stuff all the time.
Saudi Arabia is the single biggest investor in Silicon Valley. So also the world's largest.
But wait, they actually gave the first AI human rights in Saudi Arabia. Maybe that has something to do with I'm not being sarcastic this time. With all
Yeah,
of the
I
money
know.
pouring into Silicon Valley and all of the satanic crooks up there.
Maybe they've got something in mind for a very smart AI. Who knows?
Yeah, I wonder if
So
former guest of my show that was behind all of the trolling and larpers and all of that had any connection with that. That
who knows?
yeah.
So the world's biggest IT investment fund called Vision Fund, which is a $93 billion fund, is received $46 billion from the Saudis. They control half that fund. They're the single biggest investor. So they own semiconductor companies, Slack, DoorDash, GM. So Saudi puts money into a bunch of things. Okay. And not only that, but UAE based Mubadala Investment and Saudi Arabia's PID Public Fund also put money in. So you've got SoftBank's $100 billion investment fund, and the Saudis committed $45 billion, according to Wall Street Journal. Okay. So also, JP Morgan and BlackRock have been doing business with Saudi Arabia for years. Okay, so you've got in Silicon Valley, so at that time, that $11 billion that Salman put in since 2016, but now you're looking at a $45 billion investment. So they've put in just under $60 billion in the last 3 years into IT in Silicon Valley. So now let's look at Wahhabi indoctrination in U.S. education. Remember earlier, some of the reports said that, well, look, okay, they're spending so much money in lobbying, which is at times slightly less and at times more than Israel does, at times significantly more than Israel. But let's see where their money really goes. Because the article stated they're putting money into think tanks and universities. Let's have a look at that. Here's the article. Why is there so much money in Saudi money in American universities? So let's have a look. And of course, this article says our schools get Judas cash to betray the US. Okay, they're getting paid to betray the US. Let's have a look. So let's follow the money, University Dawa. So what we have is, notice you have Qatar, which has sunk in the last 6 or 7 years $1.25 billion into American universities. Add that to the $649 billion from Saudi, you have $1.9 billion, which is 35.4 times more than Israel has spent since 2011. Israel has spent a grand total of $53 million here. So between these two countries, you have 1.9 billion. So that's 35 times more than Israel has spent. Now you add Kazakhstan, which has spent more than Israel, and you take Kuwait, which has spent more than Israel. Both of them have spent about $10 million more than Israel. Now you've got 2 billion, 30 million, which is 38 times more than Israel. Now you add the UAE, which has spent $231 million in Dawa funding. That is religious indoctrination funding in American universities. That puts us at $2.261 billion, which is 42 times more than Israel has spent in the same period. And now when you add all the other Islamic countries together, you get $2.517 billion, which is 47 times more than Israel has spent. Israel is spending money in American universities on biotech research. They fund biotechnology programs. What are these Arabic countries funding? Well, mainly Islamic indoctrination. Any questions?
Well, I would assume that they would also be funding liberal ideology to break the family, break the backbone of America, as well as
Yeah. I mean,
anti-gun garbage as well, because they need to disarm the West so that they can take over for their Sharia
well, the
stuff.
Chinese spent $680 million themselves.
Right, which is
Yeah.
still a lot less than the Islamic countries, but Adam Green told me that Israel is behind all of this stuff, so we should believe him, right, and not the
Well,
math.
look, so take $53 million from Israel on biotech, and then you take $3.2 billion, $3,200 million versus $53 million. And we know 53 is way bigger than 3,200, okay? Which once you include communist China, and that's over 50 times more than
But we shouldn't look at China or the Arabic countries because, You
It's
know,
racist to criticize
it would
brown
be
people.
racist. It would be, you know, anti-Marxist, Islamophobic if we
That
looked
would
at
be wrong.
facts.
It's okay to be anti-Semitic, but it's not okay to criticize brown people.
Well,
So moving on.
but
Excuse my
they live
French.
in caves with box cutters, you know. So I mean,
Yeah, so
they
they
are
need to be.
victims.
Yeah. Let's have a look. Following the money. Let's just take a look at one university, George Washington University. So, U.S. taxpayers for Middle East studies, okay, Middle Eastern studies, U.S. taxpayer gave $258,000. That's government money to that program at the university. What did the Islamic nations pay to George Washington University? 100,854,000. What did Israel give? 507,000. 100,854,000 from Islamic nations for their indoctrination program, their dawah. Israel gave 507,000, went into biotech. You tell me. This is from the Department of Education, Title 6 grants 2019 to 2021, and Department of Education foreign gifts and contracts data 2011 to June 2018. And that link I've made available before in the previous episode. The link to that data, that spreadsheet, is in the comments and in the description. Let's have a look. Let's graph this. Islamic lobby, which is the university dawah spend. Let's have a look at Israel here on the bottom versus all the other Islamic countries. This is what Israel spends on biotech, and this is what these countries spend on Islamic lobbying and indoctrination. This line here, I assure you, is longer than this line. I'm pretty convinced.
But what about relativism?
Well, yeah.
I mean, see, I'm an SJW, and I feel that that line for Israel is longer than the one for Qatar and Saudi Arabia.
That's where Hitler would say, you know what? Please proceed to the gas chambers voluntarily and gas yourself.
Right.
Uh,
Well, I mean,
the gene pool can do better without people that dumb. So notice the spending by Qatar is nearly 1.4 billion. Okay, so let's combine all of these numbers and let's put them into one single graph. Let's have a look. Israel versus all the other countries. That's the spend. Israel versus the Islamic countries over the last 8 years. That is the spending difference. Biotech research versus indoctrination. So to conclude this section, they couldn't change your mind, so they went after your children.
pediomorphosis, as Leary would call it.
Yeah.
But wait, you know, Synaptic Nuisance says they say Israeli controls Saudis. I mean, we've already exposed that as utterly stupid dog vomit regurgitation in the last 13, 14 shows. But, I mean, it's got to be true if someone...
control that guy.
What's that?
The Zeta Reticulans are controlling that guy. He didn't say that of his own free will. He said that because his mind is controlled by aliens.
You're right. By Zeta Reticulans.
Exactly. That's why he said that. He can't help himself.
I mean, he has a laundry list of talking points, and it's like,
so
you know, you have to regurgitate them just because you heard them, and that's what people say. So I'm regurgitating it.
That's all they have.
And then you lick it up like dog vomit.
Yeah, seriously. You know, it's like, I don't know. Let's talk about following the money again. Let's look at Sharia finance, okay, which is worth currently in the US over $3 trillion. Okay. So the hot trend in 2017, the rise of Islamic banks on Main Street, USA. Jewish banks? No, Islamic banks. In the United States, a quiet financial revolution is going on under the radar of the public eye. It's the rise of Islamic financial institutions ranging from small banks in the Midwest to nationwide investment banks and brokerage firms. Let's have a look. Islamic banks that fund terrorism. Inquest revealed a Washington, D.C. lobbying group with close ties to Hillary Clinton was paid by a Bengali bank tied to terrorism. And there was even Bank Melli, an Iranian bank linked to terrorist groups that are known and involved. So since 2000, Islamic banks have become a force to be reckoned with. Islamic banks' capital grew from $200 billion in 2000 to close to $3 trillion in 2016. in the 2020s, they expect $4 trillion, which is fascinating. $4 trillion. That could buy me a haircut and a glass of orange juice, I'm telling you. So, but of course, you see, the $53 million that the Israelis get put into universities versus the $2.6 billion, one Israeli dollar is worth about 38.792 times of what a Saudi, if you give a dollar to an Israeli man and a dollar to a Saudi, that Israeli dollar can actually buy more because magic. Moving on. So the largest bank in the US is worth $2.5 trillion. Yet Islamic banking is worth at this point over $3 trillion. And it's only going to grow. It's only growing. So moving on. So now we've got close to the end here. The vast power of the Saudi lobby. And this article was written in 2007. Somehow, though, I can't shake the idea that the Israeli lobby, no matter how powerful, isn't all it's cracked up to be, particularly where it concerns the Bush administration, past and present. Indeed, when I think of pernicious foreign lobbies with disproportionate sway over American politics, I can't see past Saudi Arabia and its royal house led by King Abdullah, the long and corrupt history of Saudi-American relations. And the article goes on. So moving on. Let's have a look. Let's look at some objective sizes. I mean, so let's look. This is Israel by size compared to the US, right? This is Israel superimposed across the US, India, Mexico, and Iran. Okay? That is
but you got to take into account that they're filled with super people. I mean, you don't want to give Israel a tiny wiener complex here.
Yeah, these guys, it's Goku and it's Super Saiyans. I know. It's sure. Let's have a look at this. Is Saudi Arabia imposed on the US? Okay, let's put Israel on top of Saudi Arabia. It's tiny. There's nothing going on.
But come on. I mean, Israel is filled with super people, and Saudi Arabia has brown people with box cutters living in caves.
Exactly, with no money.
With no money and no political influence.
Israel would literally disappear in the Great Lakes. It couldn't even fit in the Great Lakes. It would literally drown in the Great Lakes. So moving on. Here we've got Israel. Okay, that is the map of Israel. Let's put it into perspective. That is where Israel, let's do that again. That is Israel's place in the Middle East. The green area are Islamic countries. The green area are Islamic countries. This little red area here, that is Israel. So let's see. The green area, as we all know, is made up of caves, camels, box cutters.
They drink urine too, though.
Yeah, a small minority of violent jihadis, just a small minority of over nearly 2 billion people. They have no money. They have no oil. They have no power. They have no U.S. political influence. And they have no space for the Fakistinians to go. Now, we also know that the red area has unlimited money and unlimited power, according to the very wise people who have no facts. So, any questions? That's me. I'm done.
Well, I'm utterly convinced. I mean, you convinced me. Do you want to unshare? You've convinced me of the power of super people, and I mean, because somebody said that the Saudis were under the control of Israel because they're super people. I mean, with unlimited power and money and no facts. So
yeah, the people that are trying to murder the Israelis, kill them, and fund their death are somehow under the sure.
Well, there's another pig slaughtered for the SJW, so-called truth movement, GDL frauds, ugly lies, and we forgot to mention Albert Bashai. He's another one of these Islamic bankers, Muslim bankers working in New York,
Synaptic nuisance. These idiots know nothing about the Islamic ideology, but yet they've got plenty of opinions. right? They
You're
have
right.
plenty.
Well, it's
So
another troll account. I
you
did
don't,
pull it
you know
up.
what? Look, synaptic nuisance. Look, you're an idiot. Okay, take my word for it. Now, if you want to come on and have a debate with me about Islamic ideology, and you can defend it all you like, you know that I would mop the floor with you and humiliate you because I just know so much about the
It's
subject.
probably Matthew North or Jesse Fat Slops
So,
Wood
so you can't
Moorfield.
tell me how Islamic ideology is compatible with Christian ideology or with Judaic ideology, or, and how nonsense, bullshit. Sorry, you people are idiots. So you have no figures, you have no facts, and I think we've just shown that your whole these people have no money, no power, no influence. That is a bullshit story. We know what the source of it is. And I would question that those two guys, Mearsheimer and whoever the other guy was, who paid them to write that book? Who funded it?
Yep. I would agree with that. Do you want to challenge Arab Green or any of these guys to a debate? I mean, obviously, Caleb ran for the woods and then, went talking crap behind our backs when he couldn't support a single claim he made. But would you like to offer Arab Green or any of these other
How
frauds,
well?
or,
My
in my
question would be,
opinion?
how well do they know Islamic ideology? Because they're clearly Islamic apologists. They're clearly apologists for Islam, and they ignore and they refuse to talk about the Islamic ideology that is behind Hamas and all these other organizations and the attacks in Israel by the Muslims who support these organizations, by these jihadis. And also, they insist on spreading their false Talmudic quotes, which are lies, which we can happily pull up the actual citations and show them these are lies. And yet they insist on quoting these. That is an issue, right? Because if the ideology and people do believe these ideologies and do follow the ideologies in these books, then they need to explain how a violation of these ideologies is supposedly a manifestation of the ideology. Because if it says thou shalt not kill, and a Christian goes and kills, goes, sorry, thou shalt not murder, and goes and murders, how is that Christian? So, but
Well,
if,
in Christianity is strictly against lying. Satan is the father of all lies, whereas in Islam they worship will, not truth, and they are allowed to use taqiyya and four other types of lying to justify Islam. And we've exposed this repeatedly, but these guys don't want to deal with such uncomfortable facts and truths.
well, I think, look, these people are talking, they're following Islamic talking points. They're following the Arab lobby talking points. I think we've demonstrated there is such a thing as the Arab lobby. There is such a thing as the Islamic lobby. There is such a thing as the Saudi lobby. Yet, this is not discussed. So there's only discussion talked about Israel, which somehow is supposed to have unlimited money. How do 20 plus Arab nations who have oil and lots of people, right, a huge market, not have the funds, the manpower, and the ability and influence, right, in terms of their market to not influence the US? And we see that they do. I mean, there's so much information I had to leave out, right? Also, they're close to Hillary Clinton, they're close to Barack Obama, they're close to George Bush, right? These people have clout, they have influence, and there's so much more to be discussed that I've only have so much time. But why are these things ignored by people like Arab Green? Why are these things like ignored by people like Riyadh Dawson? Somehow they're repeating the very same talking points of the Arab lobby. Is that a coincidence?
It can't be. And here's another issue too: is when you pull up Albert Bashai or Arab Green or Riyadh Dawson, all of these guys, they have Palestinian flags in their backgrounds. They all use this
Mm.
same symbolism. Maybe Jesse Spotswood Moorfield is the only one who doesn't, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, he goes around with a Masonic bag over his head,
I mean,
but
like synaptic pestilence is going on. Look, anytime they need an escape, right? Anytime they need a get out of jail free card or need to pull some magic, a rabbit out of a hat, it's the Israelis somehow did it. Now the Israelis somehow own the Israelis own Saudi Arabia. That is Shia propaganda. That is how the Shia are fighting against, that's the Iranians fighting against the Saudis by trying to affect or at least influence all of the disaffected in Saudi, because Saudi has more than 70% of their population is below the poverty line. Right? They're heavily oppressed population. That's not to say they are heavily indoctrinated, because they are. I've been there many times. But the issue is that they're trying to claim that, oh, the Israelis control your government, that's why you're poor. And now synaptic pestilence comes along, and now he imbibes Iranian Shia propaganda. But it's a convenient way to attack the Jews, and also to just get out of the truth.
Well,
Because
and it's like this half-wit, eyes wide open. Thank God they can't drop nukes off camels when we just showed that they're spending so much money on weapons and stuff. So, I mean, it's like, there's just a
yeah,
intellectual disconnect there. They can't look at simple
um,
facts and come to, you know,
Dashing Rogue asked about maybe I should. Dashing Rogue asked about fourth generation warfare the other day, um, and the fact is that it was long acknowledged that there is a new generation of warfare that is brewing. And let me just briefly share this. I'm going to this article here, a new generation of unrestricted warfare from War on the Rocks. It's by David Bono and Nora Ben Sahel. So, two Chinese colonels called a book about unrestricted warfare in the age of globalization. Modern warfare will no longer be primarily a struggle by military means or even involve the military at all. So these people were about a decade before their time, although even prior to that, the Marines had already written that warfare would be ideological. It would be forces fighting in the ideological information space, not so the warfare would be economic. So the whole BDS movement is an economic warfare strategy against Israel. And all of the propaganda is to destroy the American-Israeli relationship, to reframe it using NLP to make it something toxic, to then promote the benefit of Islam and Sharia and stoning your wife to death. Um, you know, so yeah. So yeah, eyes wide open. Yeah, I got that. It was a joke. So anywho, so warfare is no longer about bullets and bombs and kinetic means. It's about ideology and economics.
correct. And pedomorphosis by manipulating our kids in the universities to believe dumb
And that's what
crap.
they're doing. They're putting
And
in
and and
billions of
and,
dollars.
and to hate America, you have to hate your own country. I mean, for Sharia and Islam to succeed, who does such idiotic ideology benefit? Does it benefit us and our neighbors and our families and our country, or does it benefit our enemies? And if you think that your hate America crap is doing anyone any good, go jump off a cliff or shoot yourself or something.
Yeah. No, look, I don't think any of this is organic. You've got the communists who are pouring in nearly $1 billion a year. Also, we discussed before, and I did find the references. You can find the reference on Wikipedia. In this case, Wikipedia is reliable, but I have other references as well, discussion given to the US government by some researchers. But the communists from the 60s, the Soviet Russia, was spending $1 billion a year on propaganda against the West to promote communism. Saudi Arabia spends 3 times that just on propaganda. 3 times that money. Where is that money
From
going?
from caves, they spend that.
Yeah, no, they have a small money tree and they save up, they scrape together, they dig a little bit, they find shells, they sell them, sell their kids, sell their little hair clippings and toenails to people who make wigs, and they make a few cents here and then. After that, they finally have a little bit of money to fund their propaganda campaign. Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, I think this is a good place to wrap it up. Thank you for any support. Please support the show. Obviously, the main channel has been demonetized, and we've been over here for several weeks. Hopefully, they'll remonetize the other channel. I haven't heard back yet, but of course, they're making excuses about doing so and whatnot, dragging their feet. As far as I've heard, there is a class action lawsuit against Google, YouTube for shadow banning channels. I need to contact the lawyers for that and get on that as well. But thanks, everyone. Thank you for your support. Please go to the logosmedia.com website, support the channel and the show. Also, please, you can subscribe on Patreon, etc. I've put the links in the chat tonight. Thank you, everyone. And, here's this guy, Brian Murray Truth, A Voice in the Desert. Religion divides us. Only if you've never studied any religion, if you believe that truth is God, like those who've read the Bible, you would get it and you would understand
Yeah, but
that Islam
why do,
worships will, which is essentially Satanism, and is highly different. You shouldn't have deleted that because I was responding to
yeah, but why do
his
people not
drivel.
believe that they are evil religions? They are evil religions, right? The Aztecs
And they
murdered
clump
up to,
everything together, right?
yeah, the Aztecs were slaughtering, beheading, and ripping, literally cutting open people's chests and ripping their hearts out while they were alive, of up to 8,000 people per day, right?
That was
The
just at
largest,
the coronation of Montezuma, but that's correct, and people can read that in
yeah,
in
they would slaughter
Diego Duran's
hundreds.
book, right? Yeah, I've
And
read the
also,
official reports of that.
and if you look at the Inca grave sites, they've got the largest child slaughter sites in the world, where children were sacrificed and killed to their
But hey,
gods.
that we have to have. Uh, oh shoot! Right when I went to say it, native revivalism and bring back shamanism and worship all things Aztec and Incan, because those must be good because they're old and whatnot. But
Yeah, then we'll bring back live human sacrifice next. Unfortunately, those are part and parcel of that.
let me just show people here. This is a paper that I've worked on. Let me see if I can find that. And of course, Wasson lies about all these citations here. And this is out of Diego Duran's book from the late 1500s, and he says all of them were sacrificed in honor of his coronation. This is Montezuma's coronation, and it was a painful ceremony, and it was a pathetic thing to see these wretches as victims of Montezuma. It had become as common among these people to sacrifice men on feast days as it is for us to kill lambs or cattle in the slaughterhouse. I am not exaggerating. There were days in which 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, or 8,000 men were sacrificed. Their flesh was eaten, and the banquet was prepared with it after the hearts had been offered to the devil. When the sacrifice was finished and the steps of the courtyard were bathed in human blood, everyone went to eat raw mushrooms. With this, they went out of their minds and were in a far worse state than if they had drunk a great quantity of wine. They became so inebriated and witless that many of them took their lives with their own hands. Under the strong influence of these mushrooms, they saw visions and had revelations about the future, since the devil spoke to them in their drunken madness. And that is from Diego Duran, History of the Indies of New Spain, page 407, and I think that's from 1592. But that is one of the official reports, and I also have the official reports that the Aztecs themselves mentioned about the mushroom rituals, which were not good. But people actually think that these mushroom rituals, are healthy. But somehow, if you believe that truth is God, that is divisive, not bringing together. But Brian Murray has clearly never read the Bible, so excuse him. And I was there once before I read it, and I believed
I
stupid
mean, for
comments like
instance,
that
people
too.
assume religions are all about love. Islam is a conquest ideology. It is an ideology of warfare and conquest with a religious component.
Right. And they believe that the world will be in peace once everybody is either murdered or subjugated in the name of Islam.
So, I mean, the sheer amount of ignorance that people have, but I mean, at some point, it would be interesting to sit down and talk to some of these Islamic apologists that go on, as we've mentioned, Arab Green and so on, and see what do they really know about Islam? What do they really genuinely know? Are they simply mistaken, or are they ideologically possessed by a certain agenda because they're, for whatever reasons? That's something that,
Taking a paycheck or whatever the case may be.
or whatever the case may be, or they, but they don't seem to realize that so many Muslims believe what's in those books, and what's in those books is violent, right? And it's not Christianity, it's not the same. And there's so many people who have these really, really ignorant opinions, and that's very sad. That's really sad.
Whether they're dupes or paid shills is the question. That's
Yeah,
what it comes down to. So
yeah. But I think hopefully tonight I've conclusively shown. I was going to do like 10 more slides on just the George Bush family, but I figured that was too many. But hopefully, we've shown that the Arab Islamic Saudi lobby is powerful, is wealthy, has a lot more money than Israel. I mean, Saudi's GDP is double that of Israel.
did
The
you want
national,
to discuss the list of Muhammad's wives or why the apostates have to be executed in Islam, or is that for another show?
um, the list of Muhammad's wives and concubines. Oh my gosh. Um, do you think that's worth fitting in? I mean, really, let's just maybe stick to the subject. I'm really tired, actually.
All right,
When
yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's
I
just
wasn't reading very well because I'm really tired tonight.
let's save it for another time. But that'll give some food for thought to people. But yeah, there's a January 2nd,
So
2010.
hopefully, when people tell you that story, give you the narrative Israel controls the US and the Arabs have no money, no power, no influence. Well, show them the slideshow. Talk to them. Tell them what I've told you. It's absolutely not true. These people have more money than Israel. They have more influence and more power.
Absolutely correct. Thank you so much, and thank you to the trolls for all your attention. Thank you to everybody for your support and donations tonight. Please go to logosmedia.com, support the show. We can't do it without you. See you next week. I'm not sure who's going to be on next week. We'll figure it out, and we'll see you then.
Thank you, guys. Do support Jan with all the work he's doing. He really needs it, and this is valuable work. All right. Thank you, guys.
Bye bye.
Good night.